The thing about pine cones is they have a very complicated appearance. For this reason they seem like very tricky subjects to paint. In this video I'll show you how to simplify the process of painting pine cones in watercolor. These prickly little things are a great subject for practicing your painting skills, and where I am at this time of year there's an abundance of pine cones, so they're easy to find. So next time you're out and about, try collecting a few to set up your own still life compositions, or if you prefer you can download the worksheet for this painting by following the link below this video and make your own version using this step-by-step example. Pine cones can be a daunting subject because they look so complicated. Here's an example of what I mean. The overall form of the cone is somewhat similar to an egg, but the whole thing is broken down into a multitude of uneven scales. The best way to simplify complex organic forms like this is to break the subject down into simple, big shapes using the main differences in value as a guide. As a quick reminder, value in art refers to the lightness or darkness of a given hue. In the case of this pine cone, it's easy to see that the outer tips of the scales represent the lightest part of the object. These can be grouped into a single set of light-valued shapes, which can be isolated and painted first using a light range of colours. On the other hand, the inside of the scales is in the shade. This part of the cone painting can be considered as one large dark shape, so to complete the painting of the cone you can just fill in the shape between the tips of the scales using a dark-toned mix of paint. And if you want, you can then add more depth to the painting by adding some brush strokes of darker paint to the underside of a few scales. Splitting darks and lights into simple groups of shapes like this is an excellent way to organise your painting process and make your watercolour paintings easier to handle. In art, this is known as defining the value structure. The hard part is training yourself to recognise differences in values. One trick you can try is squinting at the subject to blur the details and help you see the bigger shapes more easily. Start by painting the tips of the cone's scales using a diluted brown colour. As you can see, I'm leaving a small part of each shape untouched to represent the highlights. This is a watercolour technique known as reserving whites. When the first layer of paint has dried, you can add some more brush marks to the underside of each tip. Painting successive layers of paint onto a dry surface like this is a method called glazing. This helps give a three-dimensional feeling to the shapes, with the white highlights suggesting the faces turned up to the light and the darker glazed brush marks suggesting the shaded faces turned downwards. Leave the paint to dry again before moving on to the next stage. Now you can start filling in the rest of the pine cone shape by painting around the tips with a darker toned brown mixture. Treat the whole of the shaded parts as one big shape and paint everything in one go. I used a medium reddish brown for this layer of colour. Then, before the shape has time to dry, I dropped in some brush marks of dark and neutral brown to intensify the shaded centre of the cone. To make a neutral colour like this, you can start with a brown paint such as burnt umber and add some of its complementary colour. In this case I used French ultramarine. Complementary hues are colours that are opposite each other on the colour wheel. To intensify the shadows underneath some of the scales, I used a mix of French ultramarine with a small amount of burnt umber. This produces a neutral blue mixture. But because this is applied as a glaze over the top of a red hue, the transparency of watercolours allows the two layers to combine to produce a grey appearance. This is one of the characteristics of glazing in watercolours. In essence, these successive layers of paint merge to produce a new colour appearance. Finally, if you want to add more depth to your cone painting, you can add some cast shadows underneath the pine cone using a diluted mixture of grey. To do this, dampen the surface of the paper first, so that the grey paint spreads out to produce a nice diffused edge to the shadows. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Just click on the subscribe button right below this video. Also, if you want free watercolour classes that I only share with my newsletter subscribers, head over to my website at watercoloraffair.com and sign up for the newsletter.